Welcome to Evening Chimes by the Lake, a serene and reflective sleep story designed to help you unwind and drift peacefully into slumber. If you enjoy this audiobook and would like to hear more tranquil tales, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Before we step into Clara's calming world by the still waters of Stillwater Lake, we'll begin with a short breathing guidance to help you relax. If you'd prefer to skip straight to the story, timestamps for each chapter are available in the video description below. Take a moment to make yourself comfortable. Allow your body to sink into your bed, feeling completely supported by the mattress beneath you. Adjust your pillow and blankets to create the coziest space possible. This is your time, a gentle pause to let go of the day and welcome the restful embrace of evening. As you listen, let the imagery of the still lake, the gentle chimes, and the soft glow of twilight surround you in calm and ease. Let's take a soothing breath together. Inhale softly through your nose, allowing the air to fill your lungs with a sense of warmth and calm. Now, exhale slowly through your mouth, as if releasing a quiet sigh. With each breath, imagine tension flowing out of your body, like ripples fading across the surface of the lake. Feel the steady rhythm of the chimes echoing through your chest, guiding you deeper into relaxation. If your thoughts begin to wander, that's perfectly okay. Let them drift away like leaves carried by a gentle stream, and return your attention to the sound of your breath or my voice. There's nothing you need to do except relax and listen. Now let's journey together to Stillwater Lake, where Clara's tranquil evenings by the water await to soothe you into a peaceful night's rest. Chapter 1. The Lake at Twilight. The day had quietly melted into evening, and the air around Stillwater Lake carried the faintest chill, like a whisper brushing against the skin. Clara Henslow stood on the porch of her cottage, her hands wrapped gently around a mug of chamomile tea. The wood beneath her bare feet was smooth, worn down by seasons of soft steps and weathered care. She gazed out at the lake, its surface perfectly still, as if it had taken a long, deep breath and paused, waiting for the night to settle in. The colors of the sky swirled together in delicate layers of lavender, rose, and amber, their reflections shimmering softly on the water's glassy surface. The faint rustle of wind wove through the pines, carrying with it the scent of earth, pine needles, and the lake's cool embrace. Clara lifted her mug closer, letting the warmth rise to her face, mingling with the subtle fragrance of honey and chamomile. She took a slow sip, savoring the way the tea seemed to wrap around her like a well-worn quilt, soothing and familiar. The weight of the day, though not burdensome, seemed to ease entirely in the quiet presence of the lake and its steadfast tranquility. Setting the mug down on the small wooden table beside her, Clara reached for the lantern she kept by the porch's edge. Its brass handle felt cool in her hand, and the glass panels held a faint haze from many nights of steady use. With deliberate movements, she lit the wick, watching as the flame flickered to life, its warm glow spilling onto the porch railing and casting soft, shifting patterns. She hung the lantern on a nearby hook, its light joining the deepening hues of twilight, a gentle beacon against the encroaching dark. Her gaze drifted back to the lake, where the first faint tones of the evening chimes began to drift across the water. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible at first, like a memory stirring just at the edges of thought. As the notes grew fuller, they seemed to blend effortlessly with the quiet murmurs of nature, the rustle of leaves, the occasional ripple as a fish broke the lake's surface, the low hum of the breeze. The chimes had hung there for years, strung from an old oak on the opposite shore, and their song was as much a part of Stillwater as the lake itself. Clara let the sound wash over her, a soothing tide of resonance that seemed to flow through her chest and settle deep within her. She leaned lightly on the porch railing, her fingers brushing the cool, smooth wood as she traced an absent pattern with her touch. A loon called in the distance, its voice hauntingly soft, and Clara's lips curved into a faint smile. These moments, these quiet exchanges with the world around her, felt like a secret shared between old friends. The sky's colors deepened, the lavender giving way to indigo, the amber fading into the soft, velvety dark of approaching night. Stars began to peek through the canopy above, their light tentative at first, like shy guests at a gathering. Clara's eyes lingered on the horizon, where the last traces of daylight clung to the trees, their silhouettes sharp against the fading glow. She reached for her mug again, the tea now cooled but no less comforting as she held it close, drawing the lingering warmth into her hands. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of jasmine from the flower beds near the porch steps. Clara turned her attention to the garden, its edges softened by the dim light of the lantern. The flowers swayed ever so slightly, as though bowing to the rhythm of the chimes. She made a mental note to tend to the blooms tomorrow, to clear away the stray leaves and let the lavender and jasmine breathe freely. For now, though, they stood as they were, perfect in their quiet imperfection. The evening stretched on, the chime's melody weaving through the stillness like a lullaby. Clara stepped back into the cottage, leaving the lantern to keep watch over the porch. As she closed the door behind her, she paused for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the worn brass handle. The lake, the chimes, the breeze, all of it seemed to linger with her, a soft reassurance that the night would hold her gently, as it always did. Chapter 2. A Garden in Bloom. Morning arrived softly, with a pale golden light spilling over the horizon and filtering through the pines. Clara stepped into her garden, a wicker basket resting lightly on her arm, its surface already marked with years of use. The dew still clung to the leaves, and each step she took on the stone path sent tiny droplets scattering, catching the sunlight like miniature prisms. The air was gentle, carrying the mingled scents of earth and blossoms, and Clara paused to breathe it in, letting her shoulders soften as she stood amidst the quiet hum of life. The lavender plants greeted her first, their silvery green leaves and soft purple flowers bending ever so slightly toward the warmth of the sun. Clara knelt beside them, her fingers brushing delicately along the stems, the texture rough yet grounding. She reached into her basket for a pair of small shears, their handles smooth and cool in her hands. With a careful hand, she began trimming away the spent blooms, each snip releasing a faint, fragrant burst that swirled around her like a whispered memory of summer. Nearby, the jasmine vines curled along the trellis, their star-shaped blossoms glowing against the deep green leaves. Clara's attention drifted toward them as the faintest breeze stirred, carrying their sweet, intoxicating scent toward her. She moved with unhurried grace, adjusting the delicate tendrils that had strayed too far, her fingertips lingering for a moment on the soft petals. She hummed to herself, a quiet, tuneless melody that seemed to blend seamlessly with the rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the lake. A bumblebee landed nearby, its fuzzy body moving methodically from bloom to bloom. Clara watched it for a moment, her gaze soft and her heart steady. The bee's gentle persistence felt almost meditative, a reminder of the quiet rhythms that carried on without fanfare. She returned to her work, her movements synchronized with the tiny creature, each of them tending to the garden in their own way, their actions small but purposeful. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth began to settle into the garden, coaxing the scent of the flowers to bloom more fully. Clara rose from her crouch, brushing the dirt from her knees and adjusting the folds of her apron. She glanced into her basket, now lined with sprigs of lavender and a few blossoms of jasmine she had gently tucked away. Their presence felt like a gift, a small piece of the garden she could carry with her. Moving towards the edge of the garden, Clara reached the cluster of daisies that bordered the path. Their bright, cheerful faces tilted upward, and she couldn't help but smile as she ran her fingers lightly over the petals. A single butterfly flitted past, its wings painted with delicate swirls of orange and black, and she followed its lazy, meandering flight until it disappeared into the trees. As the garden settled around her once more, Clara knelt again, this time simply resting on the soft grass. She closed her eyes, feeling the earth beneath her and the warmth of the sun on her face. The distant notes of the chimes from across the lake drifted faintly to her ears, their melody mingling with the song of a sparrow perched nearby. She let her breathing slow, each inhale drawing in the layered fragrances of her surroundings, each exhale releasing her into the moment. Time seemed to stretch and soften as Clara lingered there, her hand resting lightly on the rim of her basket. The garden's gentle hum continued around her, a quiet harmony of life that required nothing from her but presence. When she finally stood, the basket on her arm once more, she felt a calm fullness within her, as though the garden had whispered its secrets to her in its own tender way. Slowly, she made her way back toward the cottage, the flowers swaying gently in her wake as if bidding her a fond farewell. Chapter 3. The Village Bakery. The scent of fresh bread greeted Clara as she stepped into the village bakery, its warmth and richness wrapping around her like a welcoming embrace. The door's bell jingled softly behind her, a familiar chime that blended with the gentle hum of morning activity. Inside, the air was thick with the aromas of yeast and sugar, cinnamon and vanilla, each note weaving together into a comforting melody. Clara paused near the counter, her eyes drawn to the golden loaves lined up neatly in wicker baskets and the delicate pastries arranged like edible treasures on polished trays. Behind the counter, Mrs. Ellis worked with quiet precision, her hands dusted with flour as she shaped dough into smooth, round rolls. Her presence was a fixture in the bakery, as dependable as the rising sun. When she looked up and caught sight of Clara, her face broke into a warm smile. "Morning, Clara," she said, her voice as soft and familiar as the crackle of a hearth fire. "Here for your usual?" Clara returned the smile, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the counter. "Yes, please. And perhaps one of those almond croissants as well?" Her gaze lingered on the pastry case, the golden flaky layers promising a moment of quiet indulgence. She could already imagine the faint crunch giving way to a tender sweetness, the perfect accompaniment to her afternoon tea. Mrs. Ellis nodded and turned to retrieve Clara's order, her movements steady and unhurried. As she worked, Clara let her eyes wander around the bakery. Sunlight streamed through the wide front windows, painting the wooden tables and chairs with soft, dappled light. A couple sat near the corner, their low voices mingling with the occasional clink of a ceramic cup on its saucer. The scene felt timeless, as though this quiet corner of the world existed outside the rush of passing hours. When Mrs. Ellis returned with a paper bag in hand, the faint crinkle of its folds broke the stillness like a gentle ripple on water. "Here you are, dear," she said, placing the bag on the counter alongside a smaller one holding the croissant. "The bread's fresh from the oven and the croissant's just come out too." "Thank you," Clara said, slipping a few coins into the small ceramic dish beside the register. She picked up the bags, their warmth seeping through the paper and into her hands, a sensation both grounding and comforting. She lingered for a moment longer, exchanging a few more words with Mrs. Ellis before stepping back out into the quiet street. The village was just beginning to stir, its cobblestone paths dappled with the shifting shadows of nearby trees. Clara walked slowly, the bakery's warmth lingering in her hands and the scent of fresh bread trailing faintly behind her. Each step felt deliberate, her feet guided by the familiar rhythm of the village's heartbeat. She passed the small bookstore, its windows displaying neatly arranged stacks of novels and journals, and the florist, where bursts of color spilled onto the sidewalk from overflowing pots. Reaching the edge of the village, Clara paused to look back, her gaze sweeping over the scene. The bakery, the shops, the quiet murmur of morning life. It all seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as though aware of its own simple perfection. She smiled to herself and continued on, the paper bags cradled against her chest as she made her way home. The promise of a quiet breakfast by the lake awaited her, the warmth of the bread and the softness of the day weaving together into a tapestry of gentle contentment. Chapter 4. A Visit to the Bookstore. The small bell above the door tinkled softly as Clara stepped into the village bookstore. The faint scent of aged paper and polished wood greeted her, mingling with the subtle aroma of freshly brewed tea from a small counter at the back. Inside, the air was hushed, the kind of quiet that seemed to invite deep breaths and slow, deliberate movements. Shelves lined with books of all sizes stretched from the floor to the ceiling, their spines creating a mosaic of muted colors and textured bindings. Clara let her fingers trail lightly along the edges of the nearest shelf, the smooth, cool surface grounding her as she wandered through the aisles. She had no particular book in mind today. This was a visit for the simple pleasure of discovery. The shop's owner, Mr. Alcott, stood behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose as he carefully arranged a stack of novels. He glanced up and offered a gentle nod of acknowledgement, his presence a steady constant in the bookstore's serene atmosphere. The soft creak of the floorboards accompanied Clara's steps as she moved deeper into the shop. She paused at a display of hand-bound journals, their covers adorned with delicate floral patterns and embossed designs. Picking one up, she traced the raised edges of the design with her fingertips, the texture both soothing and inviting. The pages inside were thick and unlined, perfect for the quiet musings she often jotted down during her evenings by the lake. A small table near the corner caught her attention, its surface crowded with an assortment of books tied together with twine. A handwritten sign read, "Staff Picks for a Quiet Afternoon." Clara leaned over, her gaze skimming the titles. One book, bound in soft blue cloth with silver, lettering seemed to call to her. She untied the twine carefully and opened the cover, her eyes landing on the first few lines of the preface. The words felt gentle, inviting, like a whispered invitation into a world of quiet wonder. Settling into one of the armchairs tucked into the corner, Clara let the book rest lightly on her lap. The chair's worn fabric embraced her, its slight sagging a testament to years of faithful use. She opened the book again, the faint sound of the turning page blending with the ambient noises of the shop, the occasional rustle of paper, the distant murmur of voices, the gentle clink of a teacup being set down. The rhythm of the words drew her in, their cadence as soothing as the lapping waves on the lake. Time seemed to stretch and soften as Clara read, the world narrowing to the quiet companionship of the pages in her hands. She didn't rush, allowing each sentence to unfold at its own pace, the story's gentle current carrying her steadily along. When she finally looked up, the shop seemed unchanged, as if it too had paused to accommodate the stillness of the moment. The book rested easily in her hands, its weight a pleasant reminder of its presence. Rising slowly, Clara carried the book to the counter, where Mr. Alcott waited with a kind smile. "Good choice," he said softly, ringing up her purchase with careful precision. As he handed her the bag, the smooth paper crinkling faintly under her fingers, Clara felt a quiet satisfaction settle within her. The book would join her at home, another companion for the tranquil hours ahead. Stepping back into the sunlight, Clara paused to glance down at her purchase. The small bookstore behind her hummed gently with life, its quiet presence a cornerstone of the village. With the book nestled securely under her arm, she began her walk back to the cottage, the day unfolding with the same deliberate ease that had carried her through the morning. Chapter 5. Afternoon by the Hearth. The afternoon sunlight poured through the wide windows of Clara's cottage, its golden warmth pooling on the wooden floor like a soft blanket. The quiet hum of the day had settled into an unhurried rhythm, each moment stretching gently into the next. Clara knelt by the hearth, her hands moving with practiced care as she added another log to the fire. The wood caught quickly, flames curling around the bark and casting a soft, flickering glow across the room. The scent of pine filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of lavender from the bundle of dried flowers hanging above the mantel. She leaned back on her heels, letting her gaze linger on the fire's dance. The hearth had always been the heart of the cottage, its steady warmth a quiet reassurance through each season. Clara reached for the knitted blanket draped over the arm of the nearby chair and wrapped it around her shoulders. the texture soft and familiar against her skin. The weight of it settled comfortably, a gentle reminder of the quiet simplicity that filled her days. On the small side table next to her, a cup of herbal tea waited, its steam curling upward in delicate tendrils. Clara lifted the cup, the warmth seeping into her palms as she took a slow sip. The flavors were subtle, a blend of chamomile and mint, their soothing notes spreading through her like ripples on still water. She set the cup down again, the faint clink of porcelain against wood barely disturbing the hushed atmosphere. Beside the tea sat her newest book, its blue cloth cover catching the light. Clara picked it up, her fingers brushing over the silver lettering as she opened to the page she'd marked earlier. The words greeted her like an old friend, their rhythm steady and inviting. As she read, the fire's gentle crackle provided a quiet accompaniment, each pop and hiss blending seamlessly with the story's unfolding narrative. The room seemed to breathe with her, its stillness punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant call of a bird outside. Shadows shifted lazily on the walls, their movements dictated by the fire's flickering glow. Clara's eyes moved steadily across the page, her mind sinking deeper into the story's world. Each sentence felt like a step on a familiar path, the words guiding her through a landscape of quiet wonder. Time passed unnoticed, the afternoon slipping by in a series of small, unhurried moments. When Clara finally looked up from her book, the light outside had softened, its golden hues giving way to the warmer tones of approaching evening. She closed the book gently, her fingers lingering on its cover for a moment before placing it back on the table. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, their heat radiating a steady warmth that filled the room. Rising from her seat, Clara stretched lightly, the movement slow and deliberate. She crossed the room to the window, her bare feet brushing against the cool wood floor. Outside, the garden swayed gently in the breeze, its colors muted by the softening light. The sight brought a quiet smile to her lips, a small acknowledgement of the day's peaceful unfolding. Clara returned to her seat by the hearth, the blanket still draped around her shoulders. She took another sip of tea, now cool but no less comforting, and let her gaze settle once more on the glowing embers. The day had been simple, filled with small joys and quiet moments, each one weaving seamlessly into the next. As the shadows deepened and the evening began its approach, Clara felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her, as steady and enduring as the warmth of the fire. Chapter 6. Evening Chimes by the Lake. The sun had slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a faint blush of rose and gold that lingered in the sky. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the soft creak of the wooden boards beneath her feet blending with the quiet hum of the evening. The lantern she had hung earlier in the day cast a warm golden glow, its light spilling across the steps and onto the path that led to the lake. A cool breeze brushed past, carrying with it the mingling scents of pine, jasmine, and the earthy richness of the water. The lake was a mirror, its surface reflecting the deepening hues of twilight and the first glimmers of stars overhead. Clara's steps were slow and unhurried as she made her way down to the edge of the water, her sandals lightly crunching against the gravel path. The evening chimes began their soft melodic song, the notes drifting gently across the lake. They seemed to echo in the stillness, their tones weaving seamlessly with the faint rustling of leaves and the distant call of a loon. Clara reached the wooden dock that stretched out over the lake, its surface smooth and cool under her bare feet. She paused for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the scene before lowering herself to sit at the dock's edge. The water lapped softly against the wood, its rhythm steady and calming. She let her legs dangle just above the surface, the faint coolness of the lake rising to meet her skin. The chimes continued to play, their notes filling the air with a sense of gentle rhythm and harmony. Clara's gaze drifted upward to the sky, now a canvas of deep indigo and scattered stars. The constellations began to emerge, their patterns faint but familiar, like old friends returning for an evening visit. She traced their shapes in her mind, her thoughts quiet and unhurried, each one flowing into the next without resistance. From her pocket, Clara pulled out a small notebook and pencil. The cover of the notebook was worn, its edges softened from years of use. She opened it to a blank page and began to write, her words slow and deliberate. They weren't meant to capture anything grand or profound, only the simple observations and thoughts that drifted through her mind like the evening breeze. The act of writing felt grounding, her pencil gliding across the page in a rhythm that matched the gentle sway of the chimes. A sudden ripple in the water drew her attention, and she glanced out across the lake. The faint outline of a heron moved gracefully along the far shore, its silhouette sleek and purposeful against the fading light. Clara watched its movements, her breath naturally slowing to match the deliberate pace of the bird. Moments like these, she thought, were what made the lake feel alive, its stillness enriched by the quiet stirrings of its inhabitants. The air grew cooler as the evening deepened, and Clara wrapped her arms around herself, drawing in the comforting warmth of her shawl. She closed her notebook and set it aside, her focus returning to the chimes and the water. Their interplay created a melody that seemed to echo in her chest, a quiet reassurance that the night held no demands, only the invitation to rest and be. As the first fireflies began to flicker in the grass near the shore, Clara rose slowly, her movement fluid and unhurried. She carried her notebook and pencil back to the porch, the glow of the lantern welcoming her like an old friend. Before stepping inside, she turned to look out at the lake one last time, the chime song still carrying softly on the breeze. The day had passed gently, its moments woven together in a tapestry of calm and quiet joy. With a deep breath, Clara stepped into the warmth of the cottage, the door closing softly behind her as the night embraced the lake in its quiet arms.